Hi guys, and welcome back to another lens shootout. Today we're going to have a closer look between the Canon EF versus the RF 50mm f1.8 and what one is better. And I'm going to start right now. Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this lens comparison review, we're going to have an in-depth look between the new Canon RF 50mm versus the older EF 50mm f1.8. And we're going to work out what one is deserving for a spot in your camera bag, especially if you already own the 50mm f1.8 for the EF mount. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing I want to look at is the overall build quality of these two lenses and how do they compare. Well, to be honest, these lenses are very similar, especially when it comes to build quality, but there are a few differences that I do want to mention. So both of these lenses do have a plastic construction and both of these lenses do have a metal mount. But where the big upgrade is over especially the RF version is when it comes to its focus ring. So both of these lenses have an STM motor, which means they have a fly-by-wire in construction. So it means that the actual focus ring isn't coupled to the actual focus motor. So because of that, they are quite smooth. But what's great about the new RF mount is it has got a little bit more padding to it. So it takes a little bit more resistance to move it, which makes it a little bit more easier to especially do focus pulling. So that's where you focus on a subject in video and then you pull to another point in the focus, which means it makes it a little bit easier, especially for videographers out there. Another thing that I really like about this lens, especially over the older EF version, is you can actually adapt the focus ring to allow you to change certain settings. And this is because the control ring is the focus ring in this regard. So all of the new RF lenses have a focus control ring, which means it allows you to change aperture, shutter speed, ISO, or pretty much any setting. And this allows you to be a little bit more customizable with how you use the camera. Now, in my opinion, I do have it off for the most time, but sometimes I have it on ISO. So it allows me to half press the shutter button and it allows me to change the ISO whilst using the lens. Now with the older EF version, the only thing you could use it for is simply focusing. So you could focus on a subject and then you can go ahead and change it to manual focus and then you could actually use it for focusing in that way. But apart from that, that's pretty much the only difference. So the overall design and the build quality of the RF lens is a little bit better, especially regarding anything to do with focusing. So I must say, out of the two, I'm definitely going to recommend the RF lens in this round. So the next thing I want to look at is the overall image quality of this lens and how does it compare, especially to the older EF version. Well, to be honest, I didn't notice a massive difference in image quality. The colours, the resolution, and even distortion and vignetting were very similar. Now, I think it's because the optics are very similar, especially between these two lenses. If you go have a look at the amount of elements and the amount of groups that these lenses have, both of them are very similar. So to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if Canon shared a few of the optical performances of the older EF lens and added it to the RF system. But where the big upgrade is when it comes to chromatic aberration. Now, chromatic aberration or color fringing is where you'll find sometimes colors don't necessarily match up near high contrast edges. And you might notice purple or even kind of magenta fringing appear, especially if you're taking, let's say, a photo of a sky, you might notice it around the leaves of the trees. Now, the older EF version suffered quite badly from this, and something that you'd always have to fix in post. But with the new RF lens, I did notice a massive reduction in the amount of colour fringing and chromatic aberration. So it was decent enough of an upgrade to actually purchase this lens. So if you already own the older EF version and you're after a better optical quality lens, and it's not necessarily going to break the bank versus the brand new RF 50mm f1.2, which is incredibly expensive, then the new RF 50mm f1.8 might be the lens for you, especially if you're after an incredibly small, lightweight prime lens that will fit into most camera bags. So that's what I'm going to be giving a check mark in this round. So the next thing I want to compare is the size and weight of these lenses, and how do they compare, especially if you go ahead and place it on a new RF mounted mirrorless camera. Well, to be honest, off camera, both of these lenses are very similar in size and weight. If we go ahead and compare the size, you can see that these lenses are pretty much identical. And if we go ahead and place it with the weight, you can see that these lenses are also very similar. The EF 50mm f1.8 comes in at 159 grams, and the RF 50mm f1.8 comes in at 160 grams. So you can see these lenses are pretty much identical. But if we go ahead and place it on a mirrorless camera, this is where the size and weight starts to be making more of a difference. So obviously the RF lens fits natively onto a mirrorless camera, so the size and weight doesn't change. But the EF lens, because we've got to adapt it, means it makes it slightly larger because we've got to place a RF to EF adapter on it. So if we go ahead and place the EF to RF adapter on the 50mm f1.8, you can see that it increases it to around 300 grams because the EF to RF adapter weighs around about 140. And it also increases its size to pretty much 2/3 of its original size. So if you are after a lighter weight, smaller lens for your new mirrorless camera, then I would highly recommend purchasing the RF lens. But if you already own the EF lens and you're just simply buying an adapter, to be honest, you aren't going to have a massive lens on. You're just going to notice a slight increase in size, especially if you already haven't used the RF 50mm. Now there is again a slight difference in the actual girth of the lenses as well. So if you look nose down, you can see that the filter thread sizes are slightly different. So if we go and have a look at the EF 50mm filter thread, you can see that it comes in at 49mm, which to be honest isn't a very large lens. It is one of the smaller ones, but it is nowhere near as small as the RF lens, coming in at just 43mm. Now it is easier to find a 49mm filter thread over a 43mm filter thread, which basically means filters such as UVs are going to be more difficult to find for the RF mount. But to be honest, a little bit of Googling will probably find you one fairly easily. So that's what I'm going to be giving a check mark in this round. So the next thing I want to compare is the image stabilization and focus motor. Now because both of these lenses are prime lenses, they do not have image stabilization. Neither does the EF 50mm versus the RF 50mm. But what's obviously great about owning the mirrorless version is because most mirrorless cameras from Canon now, such as the R5 and R6, have IBIS, which stands for in-body image stabilization. So it doesn't matter what lens you go ahead and place it on with an R6, it's going to offer image stabilization up to 5 stops. So that's why Canon haven't necessarily added an image stabilization to this RF lens. Obviously there are a few RF lenses that do have image stabilization, but this lens just happens to be not one of them. And again, that's designed to keep it nice and small, nice and light, but also obviously budget orientated. So if we have a look at the actual motor, both of these lenses both have a stepping motor system. But obviously what's great about the new RF lens, because it's newer, it has a slightly upgraded stepping motor versus the older stepping motor that you'll find from the EF mount. Now what's great about this is not necessarily the speed, but it's how quiet this lens is. So if we go ahead and use the EF lens, you can see that it's fairly loud even when you're using it for video. But if we go ahead and use the RF lens, you can see it's a lot quieter. But what they've done instead is they've actually made it quieter but slower at the same time. Now the reason they've done this is they hasn't necessarily affected photography, so if you go ahead and use this EF or RF lens, the speed is exactly the same for photography. But the reason it's slower for video is because they've noticed that a lot of photographers are using the internal microphone. And because of that, the noise, especially from focusing, might be slightly off-putting. So what they've done is they've reduced they've slowed this lens a lot down because it makes it a lot quieter. So you can see that if you're using it versus the EF lens, it is a lot quieter for video. So if you are planning on wanting to use this lens for video, this lens is going to be a lot quieter over the older EF lens. And the last thing I want to talk about is price. How do these lenses compare when you're looking at budget? Well, to be honest, both of these lenses are incredibly cheap. Obviously the EF lens, because it's been out for a little bit longer, is going to be obviously cheaper than the brand new RF lens. But if we go have a look and when we want to actually adapt it to your new mirrorless camera, you can see that the prices are fairly similar. So if you go and have a look at the EF 50mm f1.8 STM, that comes in at just £99. By far the cheapest brand new lens you can purchase. But if we go ahead and compare it to the RF lens, you can see that the price jumps up a little. So it comes in at just £219. So you can see that there is a slight disparity within price. But obviously at this point in time, the EF lens can only fit on EF mounts, which means all DSLRs. It means it can't fit onto the Canon R, RP, or R5 or R6. So you're going to have to buy an EF to RF adapter, which comes in at a minimum price of around £99 if you don't already own one. So if we go ahead and put 99 versus 99, you can see that the price is now very similar to the RF lens. So if you don't already own an EF to RF adapter and you're wanting to buy a nifty 50, so a 50mm f1.8, then both of these lenses are pretty much going to be the same price. So in that regard, I would highly recommend buying the RF lens over the EF lens because it's a native lens and it will just work better on your new mirrorless camera. So what are my final thoughts and what lens would I recommend for your new mirrorless camera? Well, to be honest, there is no shadow of a doubt the one that I would recommend. I would highly recommend purchasing the new RF 50mm f1.8, especially if you haven't already purchased the EF 50mm f1.8. There isn't a large difference in optical performance apart from the chromatic aberration I've already mentioned, and to be honest, the sound of the stepping motor and the actual motor itself is a little bit quieter. But apart from that, these lenses are pretty much identical. The only difference is obviously price. Because of the new RF lens is a lot newer, you're going to be paying more of a premium for that lens over the older EF lens. But again, if you haven't owned an EF to RF adapter already, or you're going to have to buy one, you're noticeably going to have to purchase obviously that as well, which means that the prices are pretty much going to be the same. So without a shadow of a doubt, I would highly recommend purchasing the new RF mount, especially if you own an RP, an R, or an R5 or R6. It pretty much is no competition in this regard. Brilliant, and there we go guys. So there is my lens shootout and comparison review between these two 50mm f1.8. Again, I would highly recommend using the RF lens if you can get yourself hands on it, because currently it is awaiting stock just simply because it is a brand new lens by Canon. If you don't already own the older EF mil, then this lens is going to be absolutely amazing and you're definitely going to fall in love with it just as I have. Again guys, if you want to like, comment and subscribe to my channel, it really does help my channel grow. Also, if you want to hit the bell notification so you don't miss any of my latest content. But until next time guys, keep creating.